Hi, and welcome to SmarketPlace. We're excited to have another episode today with Melih Oztalay. I'm here with Tom Dempsey. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, Keith. How's it going, my friend?
It's going well. It's going well. Good to be here in the virtual rock and
Oh,
roll
yeah.
uh, room again.
Can I can I
How have you
get you
been?
something?
Yeah. Well, I can't. Well, we have a really interesting guest today, Melih Oztalay. I met him out through a colleague, Michael Bendit, who's been on the show. And welcome, Melih.
Hey guys, good to be on your show. I can see you both have enough booze in the background. I'll take a drink.
Okay, good. That's what I was waiting for. Virtual
So
drink.
Yeah, exactly.
we told you that Tom and I met and had our first coffee, and we found out we both loved rock and roll. Well, then the second time we met, I got to go to his rock and roll room, which you go down into the basement, and behind a picture of what's the
Big
movie?
Lebowski.
The Big Lebowski.
Okay.
You move the Big Lebowski picture and dial in a code, and the bookshelf opens up, and it's filled with rock and roll memorabilia.
That
The
sounds
bar is
great.
made from a Red Rocks. Yeah, the bar is made from a Red Rocks bench when they upgraded Red Rocks, and he's the real deal.
Very cool. So this is what you guys do in Denver.
This is what we do. That's
This is
exactly right.
I got it.
yeah, we have all this extra time on our hands because we don't have natural
Right,
disasters.
exactly. No doubt.
Well, welcome, Melih. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your agency, and we'd love to hear about your journey.
Yeah, my journey is pretty interesting. Going back to the 1980s with in logistics management, way back in the early 80s. But by the time we got to about 87, our agency started, or actually our corporation started back in the days of traditional media. And then in 94, after the internet was starting to open up, starting in 1990, opened up the internet group, which back then was the ISP team. That's what you did back in those days. And then slowly through the 90s, we got into website development, which then turned into marketing, which then by the time we got to 2004, we went 100% digital. And honestly, I haven't looked back in the last 20 years. It was the right decision. We're based in the Detroit area with the big three automakers. We got the largest agencies in the world. You got the largest tier one manufacturers in the world over here. And so, as you can imagine, as these mammoths started to move their budgets into the internet, less and less budget was available in traditional media. So it's like, well, why try to fight for a smaller and smaller budget world when everything is going in the other direction? So we've been digital for the last 20 years, and it's been one hell of a ride.
Your clients.
And I specifically remember that period of time where I didn't quite have a cell phone yet. That was probably another
Right.
6 months later, and the internet was an infant, and the jury was still out if it was going to amount to something. So what was it in you that you saw that you thought, okay, this isn't a fad. This is something that's going to change the way that marketing is done.
Right. So interesting that you just mentioned what you said, because we have the same issue with artificial intelligence, right? So in artificial intelligence right now, it's the same scenario. Cat's out of the bag. It's not going back in, right? And the same thing was going on with the internet. And the story there, and I don't know, I'm going to try to keep it short. The story there goes back to the 1980s when we had the AOLs, the CompuServes, these online communities, right? And even prior to that, We had bulletin boards where you were connecting with those crazy modems and, at 300 baud. And so the evolution of the online world to the internet was a natural evolution, number one. Number two, online communities. I never once back in those days had an AOL account. And the reason I didn't is because I didn't like the fact that I was being confined and controlled. Because back in those days, AOL was controlling, or CompuServe was controlling the content that you were able to see. And so that in itself was the one factor. So now let's move fast forward a little bit, and you get to the fact that the internet's opening that up. I remember a buddy of mine had asked me to come down to the Sun Microsystems office in the Detroit metro area, and he showed me the Yahoo browser and I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The Netscape browser and Yahoo, and we were able to see how the internet was working, and the fact that you had freedom to search for anything that was available on the internet back in that time, and the fact that you could do what you wanted to do, that was the deciding factor in this process. The idea, again, it's the same thing. When we had bulletin boards, right? Again, we had the same scenario. The cat was already out of the bag. Technology was going to allow us to connect with people beyond our local area and our local reach. So as that moved through the process, the internet was a natural evolution, which is why I said this is where everybody's going to be going.
I started teaching at the Stamford, Connecticut Public Library about the internet. And I remember researching at that time that, there were only 10 to 15 million people on the internet at the time. And they were talking about hundreds of millions and billions of people. And that's what really lit it up for me, Tom, was the numbers that they were projecting. And you just tie that to how people want to communicate. And
they want to share.
And then in 1996,
they want to share their lives.
They want to share.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we had CompuServe.
Yeah, and you didn't quite know. You knew, I think, that it was going to be useful, but you're not quite sure exactly how it's going to be useful. In your sort of everyday life. Was it a pet, or was it something that you're gonna use on a daily basis at some point? So now we're talking about the what's the future, and there's still a tremendous amount. You mentioned AI. Obviously, that's a huge topic right now. How are you?
It's a huge topic. If again, same scenario, cat's out of the bag, right? And I remember November 2022. All of a sudden, ChatGPT opens up, and you have a lot of people seeing how AI works and how efficient it makes our lives, how fast we can do things, how much more things we can do in the same amount of time. These are all positive things. At the same time, though, you are having a lot of fear factors going on too, and AI is going to take over the world, and we're going towards Skynet and Terminator type dystopian worlds and so on and so forth, which I think is crazy to think of it that way. Because if that's what you think of AI now, what did you think when we had bulletin boards back in the early 1980s? And so there is nothing wrong here. It's just the fact that it's new, and we have to learn how to work with it, not control it, rather manage it. And so I think these are, when we talk about AI, this is we need to think about AI as a tool that's going to benefit us, not a tool that we have to be fearful of. It's going to, again, cat's out of the bag, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not going back
what's
in.
Interesting is back then we were exploring and opening up, and now one of the uses of AI is actually to help manage our world so that we can, focus our attention with access to so much, right? We're trying to actually use the AI to do more in a focused way, but also, keep your calendar and do things that make you control that.
I mean, you're not going to get away from look, I remember when email first came out, right? And email was a big deal. And then, we went from email, we went to listservs, from listservs, which turned into a big disaster. was not a good thing at the end of the day. But then we went into blogs and a variety of other social media type activities. But we have to, and my point being is that just like email got abused, right, for all the wrong things, especially with spam being a major problem, which led then to the Spam Can Act back in the was it the 90s or the early 2000s? I can't remember right now the specific time frame. But I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. And much to our disappointment, you're going to have people who are just the hackers of the world. They're going to figure out a way to abuse this as well. So the question is, can we get ahead of these guys? I don't know. But that would be the thing to control, are the hackers and the people who plan on using it for ill will. That's what we need to control. The AI itself is something that we need to manage.
And that
how
hasn't
does it
changed.
help our lives?
That hasn't changed since AOL and CompuServe and the bulletin boards, right? And
Unfortunately.
it's interesting this year with the crackdown on email by Google and Yahoo and the big mail service providers. They're really trying to get it so that there's safety and security on the internet. I mean,
Yep.
it's critical now. How's that affecting you, the way you market and how you work with your clients?
We're a predominantly B2B marketing agency. And we're a full service agency. Name of the company is SmartFinds Marketing. It's been that way for the last 20 years. We have a creative team, we have a tech team, we have a marketing team, we have writers, everybody's in-house, everybody's in Detroit. And so we have a lot of experience, we have a lot of knowledge, and we're able to work with the technologies that we use as tools. Main thing that happens is there's always change, right? And so it's a matter of understanding the change, how do you apply it, and then how do you make that work strategically. In our case, what's a major thing that affected us right now is the fact that we can't use cookies for advertising and tracking, right? And that's okay. You know what? We evolve, change. When I say we evolve, the industry evolves. We come up with different ways of doing things. And so we're doing it differently now, and we're using AI for it.
So you have first party data, and it's much more about the relationship and quality.
Exactly. And the personalization, right? The ability to personalize the experience for the website visitor, whether it's B2C or B2B, it doesn't make a difference. And so, yeah, that's where things change.
In terms of that,
so
go ahead.
What are the areas of focus your agency has today?
I don't want to say focus. I'm going to say that there's some additions or some new stuff, so to speak, right? So I'll talk about two things. One of them is our conversion rate optimization program, and the other one is about press release marketing, which also has changed quite a bit in the industry. So the conversion rate optimization, just to keep it simple, means how do I generate more leads from my existing website visitors, and what you're able to do using artificial intelligence and through a process that we've developed, being able to increase the number of leads the website generates by 200%. And for all you guys that are trying to do the math, 200% is the same thing as doing 3x. So if you're getting 10 leads a month, you're getting 30 leads a month, and so on and so forth. And the AI tool is very cool. It creates this journey funnel, and it really helps to facilitate active calls to action to make sure the website visitor, based on that journey funnel that they create for that specific visitor, takes the necessary call to action instead of the passive call to actions that we have on websites where we're waiting for the visitor to click on something or to fill out a form or whichever call to action we may have. So the CRO program is very interesting. The other one that I think is interesting is the press release marketing. Press releases has changed over the years. I'm going to try to avoid brand names here because I got the bad side of these brand names, and I got the good side too. So I'll avoid the brand names, but let's take a look. Consider press release marketing what I would consider premium press release marketing. I'm not talking about your $20, $100, or $500 press release. I'm talking about your $1,500 press releases. And why is that that expensive, right? Number one, you get 600 words or more. Number two, you have unlimited content you attach to the press release. Number three is this ability to reach out to industry publications, reporters, journalists, etc., which back in the day we really didn't have. So I'm very glad that somebody's put these types of lists together. It's very helpful. And then the fourth item is this idea that when you're doing a national press release, you're getting all the media coverage. You're getting ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CNN, the financial networks, whatever retail outlets you're talking about, whatever B2B outlets you're talking about. They're all picking up your press release and thereby generating links back to your website, which is important for SEO/Google rankings. So when you think about press releases, having all these different features together nowadays is much more effective than it used to be even 2 years ago.
So you get more effect by using the press release. You get wide distribution across the internet.
You get wide, yeah.
But at the same time, you're able to really target it.
Correct. You can target it if you want to, absolutely, and narrow it down to a specific focus. I don't necessarily agree with that strategy because the press release turns out to be not just brand marketing and brand recognition and credibility, but now you're talking about using the press release as a very easy advertising tool. And so, how much advertising can you get for $1,500 if you run normal ads, right? Versus running a press release that has a long shelf life on the web, and it has long-term benefits with the backlinks, while simultaneously on the short term, getting you exposed to a very large audience, whether it's hundreds of thousands, and obviously some of the press release networks will say, hey, we can reach millions of people. I'm not sure I'm in favor of that scenario, but I do agree that you could reach thousands of hundreds of thousands of people very quickly using with credibility, and I think that's the important factor.
So
you talked about the four? Oh, sorry, Keith.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, thanks. You talked about the 4 A's approach to digital marketing. I thought that was really interesting. Anticipating, accepting, adapting, and adopting.
Yeah.
And it was the adaption and the adoption that really kind of caught my eye, because those are very distinct. And ultimately you want the adoption, but adapting isn't enough. Neither is anticipating or accepting.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on adoption?
As you can imagine, we were talking about this earlier, but if you go back to 1980 when the PC came out, right? Every year thereafter, there was always an upgrade, a change, something that impacted, based on technology, it impacted our business lives, it impacted our family lives, our social lives, etc. So starting from 1980 all the way through to today, right? So the last 34 years and beyond now, there's no question that the speed, first of all, you have change. Number two, you have speed of change. And as time has progressed, the speed has faster. The biggest problem that we have in general, and there's been books written on this subject in terms of, like, for example, Crossing the Chasm. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that book. Very interesting book that talks about, your early adopters. Well, let's just say your inventors, right, and your entrepreneurs, to your early adopters, and then the bulk of the population, and then your late adopters, right? And I think that book, which was written back in the 1980s in its first round, it is applicable to the world that we live in terms of trying to figure out what to do with change. And so, if you ask me, what do I talk to a CEO about? I talk to honestly, I have to set the expectation about change, because a strategy that we start, and I'm not just randomly suggesting this, strategy that you start in January, that's not the same strategy you're going to have by the time you get to July. Things will change in those 6 months. And I don't care if it's a Google algorithm. I don't care if Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whoever changes their algorithms, something changes. So number one, we have to accept the fact that change is going to happen, and it's going to happen rapidly. So Usually that's an easy one for a lot of people to understand. The second one's the hardest one. That's when the change happens and now you're assessing the outcome of that change and what needs to be done. And all of a sudden you have to change budget. You need to add budget. You never take away budget, I can tell you that. That's not happening. But you are changing where budget's going to be applied, possibly, which means something else is going away. And that's a normal progression. But then there's the idea that you might need to add budget. And that's where you start getting that resistance. I don't want to do this. Well, how do I get around that conversation? I'm like, well, if you don't do this, your competition is, and how far back are you going to be if you don't do this? In the meantime, please don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you how it is, right? And so the reality is you need to accept the change and move along with it. And that's usually the hardest, that's the primary hurdle to get past. And sometimes, the client doesn't get past it right away. It could take 3 months. But in those 3 months, I'm able to show using hard facts and data what the competition is doing, how they're moving forward, how they're moving ahead. And so usually when a change happens, the best answer, accept it. Don't fret, fuss, and fume. It doesn't get you anywhere. And just move, right? Just go with the flow, so to speak. And then you can move on to the next step, which is where we have to adapt to the changes. Now, that can take a little while too, depending upon the culture and the environment of the client's internal operations and their business, because something's got to change, right? I don't care what's the content, the messaging, it's the brand, it's the website, it's all these different things that have to now be incorporated, including blog articles, LinkedIn, social media content, et cetera, et cetera. So that can usually take
you're all creating that experience.
Yep.
And you get feedback from your customers and from the market. And so you've got to be in conversation with the market and your customers.
Exactly, right. And now you get to the last step, which is the easiest one that you guys were mentioning, which is basically adopting, right? You're adapting first, then you're adopting the change, and then everybody's happy. And that lasts for about 6 months, and then we start all over again.
Changes.
That 6 months, that long?
That's long, yeah. I agree.
Right. I mean, think of it. We have a quarter to go, and where were you in January, and what were you thinking about doing?
I agree.
And what are you doing now? Right.
Right. I agree. Like, for example, this concept of finding a new approach to press releases. That wasn't necessary. I mean, what was on my mind is I have a problem with press release marketing. That was on my mind. What wasn't on my mind is this concept of how do we fix it? How do we find a different way, a more effective way to get the job done? And mind you, when I'm thinking about this, I'm not necessarily thinking I'm looking for low cost, because when you're early in the process of a new idea or a new technology or combining multiple tools, digital marketing tools into one, that usually doesn't mean that you're going to find something that's inexpensive. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to make that work, and the most important part, making sure it's quality and effective. And that usually means it's going to cost a little bit more than something else on the market. I mean, it's kind of like in the retail stores, right? Before the fall season comes out, and they bring out all the new models and the new things to wear in August. Well, guess what? In August, it usually has a premium price tag on it. It's most expensive, and by the time you get to Thanksgiving, all of a sudden it turns into the cheapest thing in the world. I think the concept is the same here. You're taking a concept and coming up with probably a premium price tag in the beginning, and then eventually over some time that price tag is going to come down a little bit. And so yeah, if you think about what was I thinking in January? How do I fix press release marketing? So this is where I'm at now.
You have the answer.
I got my answer.
So how do you? I use press releases quite a bit with my clients, and I'm really curious, like, what differentiates from calling the one of the two big press release distribution companies.
Yep.
What did you come up with? What's the differentiator?
Well, the differentiator number one is this idea that you can, and again, please, my perspective is on B2B. I'm not suggesting this is for B2C, or nor am I suggesting this is what you would do if you're a publicly traded company, um, uh, announcing your earnings or whatever, right? So press releases were
Right.
originally designed for public companies, because 400 words is all you needed to be able to get your message across. Now what we're saying is, in the B2B world, you need a little bit more substance when you're sending that press release out. Somebody's looking for a little bit of a story. So being able to get that from 400 words to 600 or 650 words is important. So that's step number one. Can you distribute a press release with enough content in the B2B world so that it has meaning and has a story behind it that people can understand? The second part of it is being able to attach content, PDFs, videos, links, right? And how many links do you get? Because the links are obviously important later on in terms of SEO and backlinks for Google rankings. And so the content that between links and the uploaded content to the press release is the second most important piece. The third most important piece is the ability to email that press release directly to a group of people. Now, whether you could email the press release to your existing contact database, okay, fine, I understand that. But what differentiates us here is the idea that you're able to send the press release to journalists, reporters, bloggers, influencers, and publications. And that has more value, in my opinion, than sending it to your existing contact base. And obviously, the last piece is, if you can get a broad distribution, you can get more backlinks to your website. Now you have SEO value that has a shelf life of years, essentially.
Mhm.
So those are your four major pillars in terms of being able to do, today's press release marketing.
And the goal, or at least one of the goals, is to drive them to the website, and then the website goal is to make a conversion ultimately.
Which is where the conversion rate optimization program falls in play with the artificial intelligence.
Right,
Getting
right.
the two work together.
Yes, full
So it
circle,
all
full
works.
circle.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the way they work together is you have one set of communications that's being distributed widely and also in a targeted way that gets the story out there. And that's so important in our
I agree.
connected world. And then you're using your conversion rate optimization, if I heard what you just said, so
Exactly.
that as people are hearing the story and they're coming to your website and your LinkedIn, where you have of your funnel, and now you're able to see
Yep.
how does
Exactly.
that content affect the ability to convert that into a conversation and ultimately sales.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And I think this concept of storytelling, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is nothing new, obviously. But the question is, how do you take the storytelling and build that into something new, something different? And to be perfectly honest with you, that's the next step in in some of the things that I'm working on. Is this idea of storytelling in social media? So storytelling in, and I honestly, I just got done talking to a partner prior to the show on this very topic. Is how do you take storytelling into social media? Because social media is usually two-dimensional. It's just a post that people are sending. Now you could create a post that's considered a carousel, so there you have an opportunity to do some storytelling in there. And stats say carousel storytelling or carousel posts are effective. But the question is, how do you take that into something to do more with that? In other words, how do you create stories that I don't want to say require, but I guess that would probably be the best word, is you're taking a story and moving it to the next post, to the next post, to the next post, where you're engaging people, or you're getting their interest so that they can turn around and want to follow you. They want to know what you're doing. But the next post continues from the last post, right? And
It's
again, I'm taking
it's
the B2B approach to this. How do you tell your story in the social media space across multiple posts, keeping people's interest?
Mm.
Kind of creating a
this is a great
storytelling
place to
funnel.
ask.
Yeah.
This is a great place to ask, given what you're trying to set up, because it really, and Tom and I run into this on a lot of the people we interview, it requires everybody to be bought in to the story.
Yes.
We used to call it messaging. I mean, now it's broader. It's part of a bigger context, so that those snippets of posts add up to something as a whole. What would you advise a CEO to, from your experience, to make this work?
Well, first of all, we need to obviously come up with a story, right? What is the angle? What's the target audience? We need to start off with what problem are we solving? And I know this sounds pretty basic, in the world of business and in the world of brand strategy, but what problem are we solving? What is it? What is the pain point of the client or your target audience? And then based on that, how do we spin a story around it that gets people's attention? This is basic. It's, kind of like storytelling 101 in the business world. But that's the starting point, and being able to figure out what is that story. And you're not just talking about one story, you're talking about multiple stories. You got to keep people engaged, right? So you come up with the first story and you need to move on to the next story. And then you need to move on to the story after that. But there has to be a progression. And I'm suggesting that the manner in which we distribute that story is the differentiating factor here. It's not about creating that story in the beginning. It's about figuring out how do you distribute it in such a way that you're keeping your audience engaged for the next post, for the next post, for the next post. That's where I think the differentiating factor is going to be. Listen, I'm also not necessarily saying anything wild and crazy here, because if you're on TikTok, or if you've gone through TikTok before, you'll see some posts literally start off with part one.
Mhm.
And then it doesn't just roll into part two. And if you go into that person that you just got you interested in that post, you go to their profile, part two is not there yet.
Mm.
So what does that require you to do? You got to follow them.
It's like, come back.
Right.
Come back, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And you might get lucky, and you happen to catch this person on part one, and they've already posted part two, like a month ago, and you can follow, keep rolling. But if you follow somebody regularly, you're going to get part one, and part two won't be there right away. So if you want to listen to part two, and you can figure out how to make it interesting, then you're going to follow that person, and that part two is going to come later. So again, I'm not saying anything.
So be real
I'm
and
not suggesting
authentic.
anything new here. It's what I am suggesting that might be
Right.
new is how do you create the story instead of, in their particular case, it's not necessarily a story. It's like literally a part two, right? They're taking one, and I'm just throwing this out as an example. A 15-minute video, and they're breaking it up into 5 videos or whatever. That's not quite what I'm talking about. I am talking about storytelling. In other words, keeping the client engaged with, or your target audience engaged, based on what it is that you're able to solve for them. What is it that you do, and what's your story behind it? That's kind of the differentiating factor I'm talking about here.
Very cool. Well, we're going to roll on to our favorite part of the show, and that's the rock and roll part. We said when we set up for the show, you're from Detroit. You got to have some great stories from rock and roll. But tell us about your music tastes and what you do to pass your time with music.
It's an interesting thing. Actually, my background is more about sports than anything else. I was an avid soccer player, in my childhood. Quite successful at it at the time, and so music was not necessarily front and center, other than the fact that yes, you listen to it, right? And so I started off with pop music. That was kind of the main thing at the end of the day. But if you go back into the 70s, we used to break, music out into, soul music. We used to break it out into rock and roll, so to speak. And so I used to listen to pretty much everything at the time. I think as time has evolved and I've gotten older, and when I say older, I mean I'm saying like by by the time I was 40, I was starting to move into new age media. I was starting to move into jazz a little bit more instrumental. And so my music history has been not very organized, for lack of better words. I think a lot of people were following music with a lot more, passion than I was. For me, my passion was sports, playing soccer, basketball, football, volleyball, right? That was my passion and that I was following. But music was secondary in my life, to be perfectly honest with you. And so as time has evolved, I'm a little bit more in a different world in terms of music
I
and
I
dance, for
follow a very
example.
similar pattern.
Did you? Yeah.
I follow, I think as we age, our tastes change,
Yeah.
and at the same time, like I did gymnastics, and I can remember the boombox playing in the gym while we were
Right.
all
Exactly.
doing our warm-ups, right? And one of the songs actually, Tom, was
Yeah.
Boston. Bring it full circle.
Yep, I agree. Right. I mean, I
We
love
have
the
a
boom
lot of
boxes.
people
I
that
love the
cheer.
boom boxes back then.
Well, I
Yeah.
think your 4A's approach applies to music
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Doesn't
there's an
it? I agree.
adaption that exists, and then there's an adoption that exists, and
Yep.
familiarize yourself with different types of music, and you don't latch on to
Absolutely.
all of them. Of course, you latch on to the ones that you really like, and you become an adopted listener or appreciator of whatever music that happens to be.
Absolutely. I mean, it's let's face it, life changes, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and you change with it as you grow. Uh, how you think changes.
Mm.
Um, what you find important changes. And so you kind of have a different perspective as time progresses. And so,
Yeah.
our music tastes change as well.
Sure.
And one of the, as we discussed prepping for the show, one of the theories we have is that today business in the digital world has to do so much that's like the way a band has to succeed and has succeeded, from the early days of rock and roll, where you're using a creative but also selling stuff,
Hmm.
and it's a business. And now businesses have to adopt a lot of what the music industry has had to learn.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yep. And I think the music industry has uh, uh, changed not only in style, but how they do it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, obviously it's music. You got music sheets, you got drummers, you got guitar players, et cetera. But how they apply all these different notes and the types of music that they come out with has changed. And I mean, just to kind of give you an example, one of my sons with his friend were in London yesterday, listening to Dream. Right? Am I saying this right? Dream Theater. They had a performance in London. And well, just to kind of explain to you why he was there, they actually built the LED screen that wrapped around the pianist, and the LED screen changed with the type of music he was playing,
Mm.
as well as during that music piece, how the screen was interacting. And so this was interesting. This group, or this pianist within the group, saw what they did on in Instagram, some little project that they had worked on, and he wanted to apply that to his piano. And I mean, talk about taking technology and making it
Yeah.
it's very interesting. I thought it was great.
What a great story, and
Yeah.
how the blending of music with other aspects of business and technology.
It's yeah. I mean, we're not going to get away from technology. It's this idea that we can live in a world without technology. It doesn't exist anymore. And we're going to see that technology evolves. We're going to see AI involved. It's all going to mature. Something who's going to come down the pipeline that we don't know about it yet. And we're going to change once again.
Well, I very
Absolutely.
quickly, because I know we're at the end, but I saw Dead and Company at the Sphere in Las Vegas last May, and you talk about evolution of media. The inside of the Sphere, about 3/4 of it is a 16K screen, and and they play for 3.5 to 4 hours often, and it was the most amazing experience that melded media with music, and it was absolutely fascinating what they're doing with it and how that's evolving as well.
Isn't that, yeah. I mean, this is. We need to do this again in 6 months, and we'll talk about what's changed.
Yeah, all right, good.
How are we adapting?
Exactly.
Hey, well, this has been a lot of fun, and thanks for joining us and keeping our vision alive. And we look forward to sharing it in the coming weeks.
It was great to be on the show, guys.
All right.
Tell people how to get in touch with you.
First of all, the best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. I have 22,000 really close friends. So,
Become one of Melih's best friends.
exactly. Best place to reach me is on LinkedIn, and I guarantee I'm the only Melih Oztalay there. So that's number one. Number two is you can reach us on our website, smartfindsmarketing.com. And I think those are the two best places to reach me.
Thank you. It's been an honor to have you on the show. And
Yep.
Tom, always good to see
Great
you.
to see you too. And Melih, I say this often, but we one of the benefits to Keith and I is we get to learn from our guests, and we learned a great deal from you through our conversation today. So thank you.
Great. No, thank you guys. It was great being on your show. I'm glad we had a chance to do this.
Outstanding. Thank you. All right, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next week.